Dad, I didn't think you'd take it this personally. Those were the words my daughter said to me after I found out I hadn't been invited to her wedding. I didn't hear it from her. Not from a phone call. Not from a card in the mail. Not even from an awkward conversation over dinner. I found out because a former coworker tagged me in a comment under a photo on Facebook while I was sitting alone in my kitchen, eating leftover pot roast straight out of the container. The photo showed my daughter in a long ivory gown, a delicate veil pinned back from her face, and a smile I had spent 30 years protecting. Standing beside her was a man I had met exactly 5 times. Underneath the photo, someone had written, "The most beautiful day of their lives." I remember staring at my phone screen, then at the calendar taped to my refrigerator door. The wedding wasn't next month. It wasn't next week. It was that Sunday, 4 days away, and I wasn't invited. At 69 years old, I had survived worse things than heartbreak. I buried my wife. I worked through 2 herniated discs. I spent winters climbing scaffolding in weather that numbed my fingers through thick gloves. I watched friends die younger than they should have. But nothing prepares a parent for discovering that the people you built your entire life around have quietly decided you're no longer necessary. My name is Martin Colby. I live just outside Springfield, Missouri, in a house I built with my own hands, back when I still had knees that didn't ache with every rainstorm. For 31 years, I worked as a general contractor. The kind of job that leaves your back stiff before you're 50 and your palms permanently calloused. The kind of job that quietly takes pieces of you while you convince yourself it's worth it. Because you're building something for someone else. For me, that someone else was my daughter, Claire. When Claire was 9, her mother, Diane, died suddenly of a heart attack in our own kitchen. One evening we were arguing about paint colors for the guest room. 4 months later, I was standing beside a grave, trying to figure out how a man who couldn't braid hair was supposed to raise a daughter alone. I wasn't perfect. Far from it. I burned dinners more times than I can count. I forgot permission slips. I showed up 15 minutes late to her 4th grade recital because a job ran long. But I tried. Lord knows I tried. I packed lunches before sunrise, helped with fractions after 12-hour shifts, sat through band concerts and softball games even when my eyes could barely stay open. Every decision I made revolved around one question: what does Claire need? I never once asked what Martin needed. That felt selfish back then. Years passed. Claire grew up, went to college on a partial scholarship, got a degree in communications, and found a job at a marketing agency 2 hours away in Kansas City. She moved into a downtown apartment with exposed brick walls and a view of nothing in particular. I was proud of her, prouder than I've ever been of anything in my life. Even after she moved out, I kept helping whenever she needed it. A car repair here, an unexpected medical bill there. Nothing extravagant. Just the kind of support a parent gives when they're able. About 5 years earlier, she'd called me in tears. Her rent had jumped after a lease renewal, and she was drowning. I told her I'd help temporarily, just until she got back on her feet. Temporary. That was the important word. At least, it was supposed to be. Months turned into years. The transfers kept going. Sometimes $600. Sometimes $900. I never complained. She always said things would get better soon. And I believed her. Because parents are funny that way. We believe things because we want to, not because they're true. A few hours after seeing the wedding photo, I called Claire. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Dad." She sounded nervous immediately. That told me everything before she said another word. "Claire," I said quietly. "I saw the wedding pictures." Silence. Then a long, tired sigh. "Oh." Just one word. Not surprise. Not concern. Just the quiet acceptance that the secret was finally out. When were you planning on telling me? Or was there an invitation lost in the mail? Another pause. No. I leaned back in my chair. The old wood creaked underneath me. No. It was Derek's idea to keep things small. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes pain comes out sounding like laughter. Small. I repeated, Claire. I counted 47 people in those pictures. She didn't answer. Your cousin Rachel was there. Silence. Your old debate coach was there. More silence. 3 people from Derek's office were there. Nothing. Finally, she spoke. We wanted people who were actively involved in our lives. The words landed harder than she probably intended. Actively involved. I thought about every overtime shift, every emergency phone call at 2 in the morning, every birthday gift, every rent payment, every single sacrifice. Actively involved. I swallowed hard. I see. Don't make this into something bigger than it is, she said. That sentence hurt more than anything else. Because to her, apparently, this wasn't a big thing. To me, it was everything. After we hung up, I sat alone for nearly an hour. The house felt different. Older. Somehow, emptier. People talk about the pains of aging, bad knees, aching backs, medications lined up next to the coffee maker. Nobody warns you about becoming invisible. Nobody warns you that one day, the people you built your entire life around might decide you're no longer necessary. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was my old friend Dennis, a retired police sergeant, 71 years old. One of the few people who tells me the truth whether I want to hear it or not. You okay? He asked. No, I said. Then I laughed. What kind of answer is that? The honest kind. I told him everything. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. Martin, stop auditioning for a role you already earned. What? You're her father, not an applicant. The words hit me hard. Because he was right. For years, I'd been trying to earn appreciation that should have existed naturally. Trying harder. Giving more. Helping more. Paying more. Hoping that eventually it would be enough. It never was. That night, instead of sitting at home feeling sorry for myself, I opened my laptop. I searched flights, then hotels, then vacation packages. The next morning, I booked a trip to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. If my daughter didn't want me at her wedding, I wasn't going to spend that day staring at my living room wall. 4 days later, while she walked down the aisle, I stood barefoot on a beach in Cabo, watching the sky turn shades of orange and violet as the sun dropped toward the Pacific. Waves rolled gently against the sand. For the first time in years, nobody needed anything from me. Nobody wanted money. Nobody needed advice. Nobody expected a rescue. Just ocean, wind, and silence. I sat there watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon. And for the first time in a very long time, I asked myself a question I should have asked years earlier. What would happen if I stopped saving everyone? What would happen if I finally chose myself? The answer was coming. I just didn't know it yet. The funny thing about getting older is that peace starts looking different. When I was young, peace meant having enough money in the bank. When I was middle-aged, it meant knowing my daughter was safe. By the time I turned 69, peace meant waking up without somebody needing something from me. And for one glorious week in Mexico, that's exactly what I had. I stayed in a modest oceanfront hotel. Nothing fancy, and the kind of place retirees choose because they'd rather spend money on experiences than luxury. Every morning I woke before sunrise. Old habits die hard. For 30 years, I'd been getting up before dawn for work. Even retirement couldn't undo that. I'd pour a cup of coffee from the little machine in my room and walk along the shoreline as the sky slowly brightened. Most of the people I met were around my age, retired teachers, veterans, former truck drivers, grandparents carrying decades of stories in the lines of their faces. One morning, I struck up a conversation with a retired Army colonel named Hayes. He had to be close to 80. The man walked with a cane, but still carried himself like he was inspecting troops. We sat on a low stone wall overlooking the water. Eventually, he asked why I was traveling alone. I told him, not all the details, just enough. My daughter got married this week. I said, I wasn't invited. Colonel Hayes stared out at the ocean for a long moment. Then he nodded. That'll leave a mark. It was such an old-fashioned phrase that it made me smile despite myself. Yeah, I admitted. It does. He tapped his cane against the stone. You know what I learned after 2 tours overseas? What's that? People eventually show you how much they value you. The mistake most of us make is refusing to believe them. Those words stayed with me for the rest of the trip. I spent a lot of time looking back over my life. The strange thing was, I wasn't angry at Claire. Not yet. Mostly, I was disappointed that somewhere along the way, our relationship had quietly become transactional. Ego. She received. The cycle repeated year after year. And somehow neither of us ever questioned it. One afternoon, I sat on the beach watching a pod of dolphins move through the surf in the distance. A younger couple nearby was arguing gently about whether they could afford a sunset cruise. Normal life stuff. Nothing dramatic. As I listened, I realized something. Those two were making decisions together. Accepting consequences together. Building a life together. Meanwhile, my daughter and her husband seemed to be building their future on the assumption that I would always cover whatever financial gap appeared. That thought bothered me more than the wedding itself. Because weddings are emotional. Financial dependence is a choice. A week later, I boarded a flight back to Missouri. The moment I landed and turned off airplane mode, my phone practically exploded. Notifications flooded the screen. Missed calls. Voicemails. Text message. More than I'd received in months combined. At first I thought there had been an emergency. My stomach tightened. I checked the names. Every single one was from Claire or her husband. Derek. 23 missed calls. 9 voicemails. More than 30 text messages. I opened the first one. Dad. Call me. The next came 15 minutes later. Please call me as soon as possible. Another. It's important. Then things grew increasingly frantic. The rent is overdue. Did you transfer the money? Dad. We need an answer. A message from Derek followed. Martin. We really need to talk. I almost laughed. Martin. Not Dad. Not family. Martin. Interesting. I sat in the airport terminal reading through everything. The messages stretched across several days. The desperation growing more obvious with each one. I didn't return any calls right away. I wanted time to think. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. Something I'd started keeping after retirement. Writing things down helps organize old thoughts. I flipped through 5 years of bank statements, transfer after transfer, month after month, year after year. The total surprised even me. By the time I finished adding everything up, I'd sent enough money to buy a decent used boat. Maybe 2. That's when the truth finally hit me. The arrangement had never been temporary. Not for them. Temporary arrangements eventually end. This one had become part of their budget, part of their expectations, part of their lifestyle. They weren't surprised when the money arrived. They expected it. The next morning, Claire called again. This time, I answered. Finally, she said. No, hello. No asking about my trip. No mention of the wedding. Just relief that the ATM had picked up the phone. Good morning. Claire. Dad. The rent payment didn't go through. I remained quiet. We got a notice from the landlord. Still quiet. Dad. I hear you. Then why didn't you transfer it? The question hung in the air. Not could you, not would you, why didn't you, as though I had failed some obligation. I looked around my kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd packed thousands of school lunches. The same kitchen where I'd helped her with algebra homework. The same kitchen where I'd cried after her mother's funeral. And suddenly I saw everything clearly. I wasn't being asked for help. I was being billed. Claire. When exactly did this become my responsibility? Silence. Then irritation. What are you talking about? I'm asking a simple question. You've always helped. There it was. Not gratitude. Expectation. A subtle difference. But a critical one. Do you remember when this arrangement started? Of course. It was supposed to be temporary. She sighed dramatically. Dad. This isn't the time. Actually, I think it is. I could hear Derek's voice in the background. Muffled and impatient. Claire lowered her voice. Can we discuss this later? Can we just handle the rent first? That sentence told me everything. The money mattered. The relationship could wait. For 69 years I had tried to be a good man. A dependable man. The kind of father who showed up. The kind who sacrificed. But there comes a point in every person's life when they realize helping someone isn't helping anymore. It's enabling. I opened my messages. Typed slowly. Read it twice. Then sent it. Just one sentence. The sentence that would change everything. Assistance is a gift. Not a lifelong obligation. The response arrived less than 30 seconds later. Dad. Are you serious? Then another. You're doing this because of the wedding. Then another. This is unbelievable. I set the phone face down. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to fix the problem. I didn't make excuses. I didn't transfer money. I didn't rescue anyone. And somewhere deep inside, a lifetime of carrying everyone else's burdens became just a little lighter. I had no idea how angry Claire and Derek were about to become. But for the first time, that wasn't my problem. The first few days after I stopped sending money were surprisingly quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. The angry texts slowed down. The phone stopped ringing every hour. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next financial emergency to arrive. I wish I could tell you I felt guilty. Part of me expected to. After all, parents are conditioned to worry. Even when our children are grown. Even when they've hurt us. Even when common sense tells us they're responsible for their own choices. But guilt never came. What came instead was clarity, the kind that arrives late in life, when you've finally lived long enough to recognize patterns. A week after our phone call, Claire showed up at my house. I saw her car pull into the driveway just after noon. She climbed out looking stressed. Tired. Older, somehow, not physically. Emotionally. I knew the feeling. Life ages a person quickly when reality starts collecting debts. I opened the front door before she knocked. Hi. Dad. Hi. Claire. Neither of us moved right away. The distance between us felt much larger than the few feet of concrete separating the porch from the driveway. Finally, she stepped inside. The house still smelled faintly of coffee. A baseball game played quietly on the television. Normal things. Comforting things. For a moment, she looked around as if remembering where she came from, the home she'd grown up in. The home I'd fought to keep after her mother died. The home I'd nearly lost twice during hard financial years. The home that represented thousands of quiet sacrifices she'd never fully seen. She sat down. I took the chair across from her. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, she broke the silence. Derek's upset. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because I noticed she hadn't started with her own feelings. She started with his. I'm sure he is. He thinks you're punishing us. I nodded. Does he? Are you? I leaned back. No. She frowned. Then why stop helping now? There it was again. Not gratitude. Not appreciation. The assumption that help should continue forever. I took a slow breath. Claire, have you ever wondered how many years I've been paying part of your rent? She hesitated. I don't know. 5. Her eyes widened slightly when I nodded. 5 years. Do you know how much that adds up to? No. I didn't either. Not until Mexico. I'd never added it all together before. Never wanted to. Because numbers tell stories people sometimes prefer not to hear. It was supposed to be temporary, she said, staring at the floor. Things got complicated. Things always get complicated. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. That evening, she left without another argument. I could tell she was frustrated, confused, maybe even hurt. But something else was happening too. For the first time, she was thinking. Really thinking. Meanwhile, Derek apparently wasn't interested in reflection. 2 days later, he called me directly. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. Martin. There was that name again. Not Dad. Not family. Just Martin. Derek. We need to talk. His tone rubbed me the wrong way immediately. Not because it was hostile, but because it was entitled like a manager calling an employee into a meeting. Okay. Claire's upset. I remained silent. The rent situation is causing serious problems. Again. Silence. Finally. He snapped. Are you listening? Yes. Then say something. I looked out the kitchen window. A pair of cardinals hopped across the backyard. Simple creatures worrying about seeds. Not mortgages. Not pride. Not grown adults expecting their father-in-law to subsidize their lives. What would you like me to say? You could start by helping. There it was. Not apology. Not understanding. Not accountability. Helping. Always helping. Never appreciation. I ended the call a few minutes later. Nothing productive was accomplished. But something important became clear. Derek genuinely believed I owed them. That realization changed everything. A month passed. Then another. Little pieces of information began finding their way to me. Small-town Missouri isn't as large as people think. News travels. Especially among older folks. A former coworker ran into Derek at the hardware store. Another acquaintance saw him arguing with a bank representative. Someone else mentioned his truck was suddenly for sale. At first, I ignored the rumors. Then Claire called. This time her voice sounded different, less defensive. More defeated. Can I ask you something? Sure. Did you know Derek had credit card debt? I paused. No. Neither did I. Over the next hour, the truth slowly emerged. The expensive wedding. Partly financed. The honeymoon. Financed. New furniture. Financed. Several weekend trips. Financed. Even parts of their everyday lifestyle had been quietly propped up by debt. As I listened, the pieces clicked into place. The rent money hadn't been helping them survive. It had been helping them maintain an image. En illusion. And like most illusions, it eventually collapsed. I felt sorry for Claire. I truly did. Not because of the money, because discovering you've married someone you don't fully know is a painful thing. Especially after you've already committed your future to them. That night, I sat alone on my back porch. Summer was beginning to fade. The evening air carried a slight chill. And for some reason, I found myself thinking about aging. About men. About the strange burden many of us carry. When you're young, people notice your strength. When you're old, they notice your limitations. The years in between become invisible, the overtime, the missed holidays, the surgeries, the stress, the sacrifices. Nobody sees the weight unless they've carried it themselves. I looked down at my hands. Scarred knuckles. Arthritis. Permanent reminders of decades spent building things. Providing. Protecting. For years. I'd assumed my value came from what I could give. Money. Advice. Solution. But Mexico had taught me something important. Aging isn't just about losing strength. It's about learning where your responsibility ends. A few weeks later, I joined a local retirement travel group, something I never would have done before. I started taking day trips, meeting new people, actually enjoying retirement. Imagine that. At 69. Meanwhile, Derek's world kept shrinking. His truck sold. Rumors surfaced about missed payments elsewhere. Friends who loved being around him during the good times suddenly disappeared. Funny how that works. Success attracts crowds. Struggle reveals who stays. One afternoon, Claire called again. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. Dad. Yeah. There was a long pause. Then she asked a question I'd been waiting months to hear. Not about money. Not about rent. Not about help. Just one simple question. Can we talk? And for the first time since the wedding, I heard something I hadn't heard in a very long time. My daughter. Not the person demanding support. Not the woman defending her husband. Just my daughter. Lost. Confused. Beginning to understand. The conversation that followed would change both our lives. But neither of us knew that yet. When Claire asked if we could talk, I knew something had shifted. Not completely. Not magically. Life doesn't work that way. People don't wake up one morning transformed into better versions of themselves. Real change happens slowly. Painfully. Usually after reality teaches the lessons pride refuses to learn. We agreed to meet the following Saturday. She offered to take me to lunch. I suggested she come to my house instead. I wanted her to see something she'd never really seen before. That morning, I woke up early, made coffee, straightened the living room. Then I went into the hallway closet and pulled out several old boxes I hadn't opened in years. By the time Claire arrived, photographs and old albums covered the dining room table. She walked inside carrying a nervous smile. Hi. Dad. Morning. She looked around. What's all this? Sit down. She slowly took a chair. Then noticed the photographs. Hundreds of them. Some oldo, some faded, some barely holding together. I sat across from her. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then I picked up the first picture, Claire at age 6. Missing 2 front teeth. Holding a fishing rod twice her size. You remember this? She smiled softly. Table Rock Lake. That's right. I handed her another. Her 8th grade graduation. Then another. Her first car. Then another. College move-in day. The smile slowly disappeared from her face. Not because the memories were bad, but because she was beginning to notice something. Someone. Me. Standing beside her in almost every photograph. Not front and center. Not seeking attention. Just there. Always there. She swallowed. You kept all of these. Of course. I reached into one of the boxes and pulled out a stack of old papers, receipts. Bills. Documents. Things most people throw away. She looked confused. What's that? Part of your story. I handed her a receipt from over a decade earlier. Piano lessons. Then another. Emergency room visits. Then college tuition records. Textbook purchases. Apartment deposits. Car repairs. One after another. Not to shame her. Not to prove a point. Just to show her the truth. A truth children often never see, that parents spend decades carrying burdens quietly. The goal is never recognition. The goal is simply love. But sometimes love becomes invisible. And invisible sacrifices are easily forgotten. Claire stared at the paperwork, her eyes growing wetter with each page. Finally, she whispered, I didn't know. I nodded. I know. Because how could she? Children rarely see the late-night worries. The second jobs. The skipped vacations. The retirement contributions that never happened. The repairs delayed. The dreams postponed. Parents hide those things intentionally. We want our children to feel secure. Unfortunately, security often disguises sacrifice. For nearly an hour, we sat together looking through pieces of our shared life. No arguing. No accusation. Just truth. Eventually, Claire broke down. The tears came suddenly, heavy and uncontrolled. I'm sorry. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was angry, but because I knew she wasn't finished. I've been thinking about everything. She wiped her eyes. The wedding, the money, another pause. The way I've treated you. I remained quiet. Sometimes silence gives people room to be honest. And honesty was finally arriving. I don't think I realized what I was doing. I nodded slowly. Most people don't. She looked directly at me for the first time in months. Maybe years. Dad, I treated you like an account. The room fell silent. It was painful to hear, but it was also true. And truth is where healing begins. A few minutes later, she told me things I hadn't known. The marriage wasn't going well. Not at all. The financial problems were worse than I'd realized. Derek blamed everyone else for everything, his employer, the economy, his friends, the landlord, me, anyone but himself. The more pressure life applied, the less responsibility he accepted. And eventually, Claire started noticing, really noticing. One night, she said, they'd argued for nearly 3 hours. Not about money, about accountability. Every solution required somebody else to sacrifice. Never Derek. Always someone else. That argument changed something inside her. For the first time, she saw the pattern, the same pattern I'd finally recognized in Mexico. The belief that other people existed to solve his problems. A few weeks later, the situation exploded. I wasn't there. Claire told me afterward. Apparently, Derek discovered she'd been meeting with me, talking honestly, reflecting, growing. He didn't like that. Their biggest fight happened that evening. Words were exchanged. Harsh words. Painful words. Eventually, he left. Not permanently. At least not right away. But something fundamental broke trust. Respect. Partnership. Whatever you want to call it. The marriage never fully recovered. Several days later, I found an envelope in my mailbox. Handwritten. No return address. I immediately recognized Claire's handwriting. Inside was a letter. 6 pages long. I still keep it folded carefully in my desk drawer. She apologized. Not just for the wedding. For years of taking without appreciating. Years of assuming. Years of forgetting that behind every dollar was a father who'd worked his entire life. One sentence stood out. I must have read it 20 times. It said, You spent decades making sure I never felt alone. And somehow I made you feel alone anyway. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. Because it was true. And because she finally understood. Not the money. Not the wedding. The loneliness. The loneliness older people rarely talk about. The loneliness of watching your purpose slowly disappear. The loneliness of feeling useful only when someone needs something. The loneliness of becoming invisible. I cried after reading that letter. Not from sadness. From relief. Because for the first time, I felt seen. Really seen. Forgiveness didn't happen overnight. Life isn't a Hallmark movie. Wounds that take years to create don't disappear in a weekend. But something important happened. The healing started. Not because Claire begged. Not because I surrendered. Because truth finally entered the room. And truth has a remarkable way of setting people free. A few days later, she called. Did you read it? Yes. Silence. Then she asked quietly, do you think we'll ever be okay again? I looked out the window. The evening sun was settling over the neighborhood. Warm and steady. Passion. Much like love itself. Finally, I answered, I think we're finally starting. Neither of us knew exactly where the road would lead. But for the first time since the wedding, we were walking it together. And sometimes that's enough. A year can change a lot. Or almost nothing. It depends on whether people learn from what happened. The year after Claire's wedding was one of the strangest years of my life. Not because of the conflict. Not because of the money. Because for the first time in decades, I was learning how to live for myself. That sounds selfish when you're young. It sounds necessary when you're 69. I traveled more. Nothing extravagant. A few bus tours. A train trip through the Ozarks. Weekend outings with my retirement group. I made new friends. People my age who understood things. Younger folks often don't. The ache in your knees when rain is coming. The silence of an empty house. The strange feeling of looking in the mirror and seeing your father staring back at you. The realization that time has become more valuable than money. I began enjoying mornings again. Coffee on the porch. Baseball on the television. Books I never had time to read. For the first time since my wife died, my life wasn't centered around surviving someone else's crisis. And, surprisingly, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Meanwhile, Claire was rebuilding her own life slowly. Painfully. Honestly, the separation from Derek became permanent 8 months after our conversation. Neither of us celebrated it. Divorce isn't a victory. It's usually the receipt for a long list of mistakes. Claire moved into a smaller apartment, sold things she didn't need, created a budget, started living within her means. The changes weren't dramatic, but they were real, and real change matters more than dramatic change. One evening, she came over for dinner. Just the two of us. I grilled burgers in the backyard. Simple. Ordinary. Comfortable. The way family gatherings used to feel. As we sat eating, she smiled and shook her head. What? She laughed softly. I used to think you had life figured out. I nearly choked on my burger. Me? Yeah. I laughed. Claire. I've been making it up for 69 years. That made her laugh too. Then she became serious. I think I understand something now. I waited. When Mom died, you never let me see how hard things were. That surprised me. Because it was true. I had hidden almost everything. The fear. The debt. The exhaustion. The loneliness. Parents do that. We protect our children from storms by standing in front of them. Sometimes for so long that they never realize there was a storm at all. She looked down at her plate. I thought life was easier than it really is. I nodded. I know. And because of that, I didn't understand what you gave up. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You understand now. And she did. Not perfectly. Nobody does. But enough. More than enough. The following spring, Claire invited me to a family gathering. Nothing fancy. Just a barbecue at a local park. A handful of relatives. Close friends. People who genuinely cared about one another. When I arrived, I noticed something immediately. A chair sat beside hers at the main picnic table. Reserved. Waiting. She waved me over. Dad. I walked toward her. And she smiled. Your seat's right here. Such a small thing. A chair. Most people wouldn't think twice about it. But older people understand. Respect often appears in small moments. The invitation. The phone call. The remembered birthday. The seat saved at the table. For a second, I couldn't speak. Because a year earlier, I hadn't even been invited to her wedding. Now she was saving a place for me. Not because she needed money. Not because she wanted help. Because she wanted me there. The difference meant everything. Later that afternoon, she stood up to make a short toast. Nothing formal. Just a few words. But I'll remember them for the rest of my life. She raised her glass. Then looked directly at me. When I was younger, I thought love was something people said. The park went quiet. She continued. Now I understand love is what people do. I felt my throat tighten. She smiled through tears. My dad spent his whole life showing me love. I just didn't always recognize it. Nobody spoke. Several relatives wiped their eyes. Mine included. Then she added, Thank you for never giving up on me. Even when I made it hard. I looked away for a moment. Sometimes gratitude is harder to receive than criticism, especially when you've waited years to hear it. The barbecue continued. Kids played nearby. People laughed. The sun slowly drifted lower in the sky, and as I sat there watching my daughter talk with relatives, something became clear. I had spent months thinking this story was about revenge. It wasn't. Not really. The wedding. The missed invitation. The rent money. The arguments, those were only the surface. The real story was about boundaries. About dignity. About understanding that love and obligation are not the same thing. For years I believed being a good father meant saying yes. Yes to every request. Yes to every sacrifice. Yes to every rescue. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back. Sometimes people need to face consequences before they can appreciate what they've been given. Life taught Claire that lesson. Not me. And life is often a far better teacher than anger. Looking back now, I don't hate Derek. I don't wish him harm. His choices created his future. Just as mine created mine. That's how consequences work most of the time, not with revenge, not with punishment, but quietly, patiently, unavoidably. As for Claire and me, our relationship isn't perfect. No relationship is, but it's honest. And after everything we've been through, honesty feels like a miracle. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's this. Never measure your worth by how useful you are to other people. Your value doesn't come from what you provide. It comes from who you are. And if someone only notices you when they need something, the problem isn't your absence. It's their blindness. Today, when I look at my daughter, I don't see the woman who forgot to invite me to her wedding. I see someone who learned, someone who grew, someone who found her way back. And honestly, that's all any parent can hope for. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about the people who quietly sacrifice for you. Maybe it's a parent, a grandparent, a spouse, a friend. If they're still here, tell them what they mean to you. Don't wait until regret becomes your teacher. And if you've ever had to choose between resentment and healing, I'd love to hear your story too. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Remember, the people who love us most are often the ones we should thank while we still can, not for what they've done for us, but simply for never forgetting who we are, even when we forget it ourselves. If you enjoy stories about resilience, family, and finding strength after betrayal, consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, it's never too late to start a new chapter.